Tonight, for the first time, police video showing what happened inside Gene Hackman's home.
Leah Chavez spent hours looking at the footage and shows us what they saw.
The most disturbing discovery around Gene Hackman's home was not a tunnel, not a hidden chamber, and not the kind of Hollywood horror story the internet rushed to invent. What stunned investigators was something far quieter and, in the end, far more heartbreaking. Signs of rodent activity around the property, 2 people dead inside a carefully guarded house, a dog trapped in a crate, and a week of silence no one understood until it was too late. When maintenance workers and neighborhood security arrived at the Santa Fe estate on February 26, 2025, they were not walking into a crime scene they could name. They were entering the secluded final chapter of one of the most admired actors in American film. Gene Hackman, the man who gave the screen its bruised authority in The French Connection, Unforgiven, Mississippi Burning, and The Conversation, had spent years doing what very few stars ever truly manage. He had disappeared from public life. He had chosen privacy, distance, routine, and the high desert stillness of New Mexico. Inside that stillness, investigators would find Gene Hackman dead at 95, his wife Betsy Arakawa dead at 65, and one of their dogs dead nearby. The facts at first glance looked bizarre enough to invite every wild theory possible. The bodies were found in different areas of the home. Hackman was discovered near the entry area, with a cane and sunglasses close by, as though he had been moving through an ordinary moment and suddenly stopped. Arakawa was found in a bathroom, with pills nearby that would later turn out not to be evidence of an overdose at all. One of the couple's 3 dogs, recovering from a veterinary procedure, was dead inside a crate. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing suggested a struggle. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. Cash and artwork remained in place. Carbon monoxide tests came back negative. Gas leaks were checked and did not explain the deaths. The scene looked dramatic, but every familiar explanation kept collapsing. That is the point where public imagination tends to sprint ahead of evidence. On social media and in sensational videos, rumors began swelling almost immediately. Some claimed investigators had uncovered a secret tunnel beneath the property. Some insisted the FBI had found something hidden underground. Some went even further, building elaborate fantasies out of nothing more than mystery and timing. But verified reporting never supported any of that. No official statement from Santa Fe County mentioned a tunnel. No credible outlet reported investigators discovering a hidden passage. Snopes later rated one of the loudest tunnel stories false. The tunnel, in other words, belonged to the rumor mill, not to the case. The real discoveries were less cinematic and more devastating. As investigators worked backwards through the couple's final days, they found that Betsy Arakawa had been the last healthy, functioning bridge between the home and the outside world. She had exchanged emails, run errands, and stopped at stores in Santa Fe on February 11th. Surveillance and records placed her at a grocery store, a pharmacy, and a pet store before she returned through the gate to the property that evening. The routine seemed perfectly ordinary. She was doing what people do when life still feels manageable. She was handling groceries, prescriptions, and pet care. There was no visible warning that this normal day was standing on the edge of catastrophe. Then investigators uncovered something small but piercingly human. In the days before her death, Arakawa had searched online for information about flu symptoms, COVID symptoms, dizziness, nosebleeds, and breathing problems. She also purchased oxygen canisters for respiratory support. On the morning of February 12, according to later records, she made calls to a Santa Fe medical practice, Cloudberry Health, seeking advice and apparently trying to arrange care. She never made it to the appointment that followed. That detail changes the emotional temperature of the entire story. She did not ignore what she was feeling. She was trying to understand it. She was trying to act. She simply did not know that what was happening inside her body was not a stubborn cold, not seasonal flu, and not something most people would ever guess. When New Mexico's chief medical investigator, Dr. Heather Jarrell, announced the findings, the central mystery abruptly shifted shape. Betsy Arakawa had died of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare and often lethal illness linked to infected rodents. In New Mexico, officials say the deer mouse is the primary carrier of the Sin nombre virus, the strain associated with hantavirus in the region. The disease can begin with symptoms so ordinary they almost invite dismissal. Fever, muscle aches, chills, headache, nausea, abdominal distress, dizziness, cough. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, early hantavirus infection can resemble influenza before progressing into a dangerous respiratory phase as the lungs begin to fill with fluid. It is exactly the kind of illness a person might search online in a worried but still hopeful state, trying to decide whether rest and patience will be enough. What investigators found around the property mattered because it provided the missing environmental context. State health officials reported signs of rodent activity in several outbuildings and structures on the estate. The main house itself was described as lower risk, but the surrounding property showed evidence that mice had been active there. That discovery was the opposite of a theatrical secret. It was ordinary in the worst possible way. Sheds, garages, detached structures, storage areas, the kinds of spaces people cross through without a second thought, can become places where droppings, urine, and dust create invisible danger. Public health officials have long warned that disturbing contaminated material can aerosolize particles and expose someone without any dramatic moment of contact. There was no hidden tunnel. There was an invisible pathway between rodent activity and human lungs, and that was more than enough. The tragedy deepened when investigators turned to Hackman himself. He had not died from hantavirus. He tested negative for it. His death was attributed to severe heart disease, with advanced Alzheimer's disease listed as a significant contributing factor. A pacemaker provided one of the most chilling details in the entire case. Its last recorded activity pointed to February 18, about a week after Arakawa's last known day of life. That meant Hackman likely remained alive in the house for days after his wife had already died. Not in a dramatic movie sense. Not in some grand scene of farewell. More likely in confusion, physical decline, and a broken awareness shaped by advanced neurodegenerative disease. That single fact may be the one that lingers longest because it transforms the story from mysterious to unbearable. Investigators and medical officials said it was quite possible Hackman did not fully understand that his wife was dead. Alzheimer's disease does not simply erase names and dates. In its advanced stages, it can destroy judgment, disrupt the ability to connect events, and fracture the chain between alarm and action. A person may feel unease without being able to organize a response. A person may sense something is wrong without understanding what, or may forget it moments later. Gene Hackman had once embodied command on screen so completely that audiences believed no room could overpower him. In the final week of his life, his own house may have become a maze his mind could no longer map. And then there was the dog. Zinna, the couple's Australian Kelpie mix, had apparently been confined in a crate while recovering from a procedure. Unlike the other two dogs, who had access to move around and survive, Zinna could not get free. Officials later said the animal most likely died from dehydration and starvation. It is a detail almost too painful to sit with for long, because it compresses the entire tragedy into one helpless image, a household dependent on routine, care, and one person's ability to keep everything running, brought to a standstill when that person suddenly vanished. To understand how such a thing could remain undiscovered for so long, you have to understand the life Hackman had built after Hollywood. He did not retire into a performance of retirement. He truly withdrew. Friends and local acquaintances described a man who wanted a smaller world. He painted. He wrote novels, including books co-written with undersea archaeologist Daniel Lenihan, such as Wake of the Perdido Star and Justice for None. He guarded his privacy with discipline. Betsy Arakawa, a classical pianist trained in music and known for her steadiness, helped make that private life work. She handled details, daily logistics, appointments, and the practical structure of a household centered around an aging man whose health had severely deteriorated. When she died first, the system failed instantly. That may be the most shocking thing investigators truly discovered around Gene Hackman's home. Not some buried passage beneath the earth, but the terrible fragility of private lives. Fame could not protect them. Wealth could not protect them. Gates could not protect them. The same privacy that gave Hackman peace after decades in the public eye also meant that long stretches without contact did not automatically alarm anyone. There were no interior cameras preserving a timeline. There was no live-in staff moving through the rooms every morning. There was no constant public schedule demanding his appearance. Silence, for this couple, had been normal for years. Only this time the silence meant death. As more records emerged, the story became sadder, not darker. Betsy Arakawa was not at the center of a criminal plot. She was at the center of a domestic routine that suddenly turned fatal. Hackman was not the subject of a hidden investigation. He was an elderly man with major cardiovascular disease and advanced Alzheimer's, left alone after the death of the person most responsible for his care. The medical findings stripped the story of sensationalism and replaced it with something much harder to dramatize honestly. Dependence, illness, aging, and the cruel speed with which ordinary symptoms can become irreversible. And yet the internet kept reaching for a tunnel because a tunnel is easier to process than reality. A tunnel gives mystery shape. It offers a villain, a secret, a door to open. Reality offered none of those comforts. Reality said a woman likely inhaled particles linked to infected rodent activity somewhere around her property. Reality said she felt ill enough to search for answers and seek help, but not early enough to outrun a rare disease that can escalate with terrifying speed. Reality said her husband, one of the most recognizable actors of the last half-century, remained alive for days in a house his illness prevented him from navigating in any meaningful way. Reality said a dog waited in a crate for care that would never come. There is no grand reveal in that. Only grief. Even the aftermath carried the same tension between public fascination and private dignity. Court battles followed over records from the investigation, with the family and estate seeking to protect personal materials from unnecessary exposure. Santa Fe County said it was trying to respect both public records law and the family's need for compassion. That conflict, too, feels fitting. Gene Hackman spent the later portion of his life retreating from spectacle, and in death spectacle arrived anyway, demanding access, demanding images, demanding explanations beyond the ones the evidence actually supplied. Maybe that is why this story unsettled so many people. It was not just about a famous death. It was about the false promise that modern life makes to all of us, the idea that someone important will always notice, that something catastrophic cannot unfold quietly in a connected age, that money and reputation create a safety net against isolation. This case shattered that illusion. It showed how quickly a household can collapse when one caretaker disappears and the person left behind can no longer reason through the emergency. It showed how an illness associated with rodent exposure can enter a life without fanfare and end it before the victim fully grasps what she is facing. It showed how privacy, so dignified in theory, can become lethal when it meets frailty and chance. The title of this story may ask what was discovered around Gene Hackman's tunnel, but the truth is more sobering. Investigators did not find a tunnel that explained the deaths. They found evidence around the property that pointed toward hantavirus risk. They found a timeline that revealed Betsy Arakawa's final attempts to get help. They found medical data showing Gene Hackman likely died days later, weakened by heart disease and lost inside Alzheimer's. They found no hidden conspiracy. What shocked them, and what should stay with us, was how little spectacle there was in the truth. In the end, the most haunting image is not underground. It is above ground, in the ordinary rooms of a quiet Santa Fe home, where one life ended from an invisible infection, another faded a week later in confusion and physical decline, and a silence settled over everything until workers finally looked through a window and understood that something was terribly wrong. That is the discovery worth remembering. Not the invented tunnel, but the human fragility surrounding it all. Beneath the rumors, beneath the headlines, beneath the need to turn every tragedy into a puzzle box, there was only a husband, a wife, a home, and a chain of misfortune so plain and so merciless that the truth itself became the most shocking thing investigators had to face. The first hours of the investigation explain why rumors found oxygen so quickly. Deputies entering a home where two people have died in separate rooms are trained to test the obvious possibilities before anything else. They looked for carbon monoxide. They called for gas checks. They examined whether pills near Arakawa might point to poisoning or self-harm. They evaluated whether a fall, a leak, an intruder, or some unnoticed accident could connect the scene. Instead, they kept running into absence. No obvious trauma. No theft. No forced entry. No single event dramatic enough to explain 2 deaths and a dead dog. In a culture trained by thrillers to assume every mystery hides a mastermind, absence itself became suspicious. But investigators kept doing what real investigators do. They stayed with the small facts until the small facts built a complete story. There was also the matter of sequence. The sequence is everything in this case. If Gene Hackman had died first, there might have been some chance, however slim, that Betsy Arakawa could have reached out for help or called emergency services. But investigators concluded that Arakawa appears to have died first, leaving Hackman, whose Alzheimer's disease was advanced, without the person who organized daily life. That reversal turned the house into an island. It severed medication routines, meals, phone calls, appointments, and the kind of invisible caregiving labor that often goes unnoticed until it disappears. People speak easily about independence in old age. Cases like this expose how dependent independence can really be. It also casts Arakawa in a clearer light. Much of the initial coverage understandably focused on Hackman because the public knew his face, his voice, and his long film career. But the reconstructed timeline reveals how central Betsy Arakawa was to the functioning of that home. She was not a footnote to a celebrity biography. She was the person answering messages, managing errands, caring for animals, tracking symptoms, and trying to secure medical help while apparently feeling worse. Her final known actions are filled with responsibility. Even while sick, she was still doing what caretakers so often do. She was still holding the structure together until the structure failed with her. And Hackman's own life story makes the ending feel even more dissonant. Here was an actor celebrated for portraying men who push through chaos by force of will. William Friedkin's The French Connection turned him into a star as Jimmy Popeye Doyle, relentless and jagged. Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven gave him another Oscar as Little Bill Daggett, a sheriff whose authority could harden into brutality. Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation let him play paranoia with terrifying restraint. Over decades, Hackman became one of those rare performers who made power look natural and weakness almost unthinkable. Yet age is the one script no talent can rewrite. In the end, the body weakens, the mind changes, and the private systems that keep a life stable become more important than fame ever was. That may be why the real story lands with such force once the clickbait is stripped away. It is not merely about how 2 people died. It is about how vulnerable any household can become when illness enters quietly, when symptoms masquerade as something mild, when one partner carries most of the practical burden, and when isolation has become routine enough that alarm arrives late. Public health officials in New Mexico have warned for years that hantavirus risk increases in places where rodent droppings accumulate, especially in closed, poorly ventilated areas like sheds, cabins, garages, and storage spaces. The warning sounds abstract until a case puts a human face on it. Then suddenly every shed, every dusty corner, every long-closed outbuilding feels different. For all the noise around the case, the official findings never really changed in spirit. Both deaths were ruled natural. The investigation followed evidence rather than fantasy. What emerged was not scandal but sorrow, not revelation but recognition. Recognition that the internet rewards invention faster than truth. Recognition that privacy can shelter a life and hide a crisis at the same time. Recognition that the final acts of famous people are often brutally ordinary. And recognition that sometimes the most shocking thing investigators uncover is not what was hidden underground, but what was happening in plain sight around a home all along. By the time officials reconstructed the timeline,